Hello, I'm Brigantia of Blackbird of Blackbird's Brew. Happy Sunday and welcome back to our series of Norse studies. This is week 3 and thank you for coming along with me on my journey. So we will begin by taking another look at the Heathen Handbook, and this week I just focused on one section. It's titled The Religion of Our Ancestors, and there was enough in this that after I read it, I just wanted to kind of marinate in that information just a little bit because it feels incredibly important to me. One of the first things the authors did in this section is contrasting the word religion with what it's come to mean in the modern day versus the reality of how religion or spirituality was practiced by our ancestors. For our ancestors, this was not something that was skin deep. You just didn't do it on Sunday or on special days. And the reason why you were practicing spirituality, it wasn't so that you could be, acting in accord with regulations that had been imposed upon you by others in the name of some god, and that you just had to trust that the people imposing this on you were being honest about what the god desired or were even in a position to know. That was not how the dynamic worked. And interestingly, it was brought up that in the Old Norse language, there apparently is not a word that can be directly translated as religion. The closest in concept is the word "sither," which means custom. So think daily life, special occasions, just how you went about your day-to-day affairs. The people's faith and the way they expressed it was interwoven into everything. You can see it in the culture and what they considered to be good manners, the arts and music, how they farmed, the buildings that they built, foods they ate, the way they went about sacrifices, their form of governments, and even the gods themselves. These are not separate things. It all comes together to form this composite whole. And that's really as opposite of what we've been taught religion is, as what it can possibly be. Because for other people, it is this very remote, categorized, put it off in its own box over here, and you dip it into when you want to, and it doesn't affect anything when you're out of it. And that's not how it was in the heathen world. And interestingly, and this is quite significant, especially if you're watching this and you're not really familiar with heathenry or paganism or anything like this, but the heathen concept of deity does not render the gods as these unrelatable, remote beings who we could not possibly begin to understand. As much as what they are does surpass human understanding and experience, there is still aspects with them that we can actually connect to. For a starter, they have human forms. And our natures, our human nature, is a reflection of their divine nature. They're just operating on a larger scale than what we do as humans. And the gods, they're not facing challenges in their mythos that are alien to ourselves. They are also actively participating in life. And because they are walking along with us, going through these mysteries, learning as they go along, the same as we are, we're not expected to grovel before them. Groveling is that's the behavior of a slave. And definitely the gods are not interested in their followers lowering themselves to that kind of status. And because they are also going through life and participating in life the same as we are, this is why we don't have to tiptoe around the gods. It's why we don't have an obsession about the fear of committing sin or making the gods angry in some way. They are in this muck with us, and they are helping us along through the example of their own experiences. And the authors made a point to emphasize that our ancestors lived in such a manner that demonstrated they considered themselves to be a part of the natural world, and that natural world had a natural order that merited respect, and it was what we were to conform to. And that's very interesting because, human beings, we have a place within nature, as much as that is not popular to think about, because if anything, a lot of people in popular culture present us this as horrible parasite, a disease, something that it would be better if it just didn't exist. I mean, the self-loathing that is inherent in those kind of ideologies is so obvious it scarcely requires comment. But that is not the pagan way of looking at things. It's saying you have a position within this natural order. You need to figure out how to carry out that role. That is our task. Another thing to think about is how physicality, beauty, and pleasure are not things to be despised within pagan religion. They are to be celebrated at the proper times and in the proper places because they are part of what it means to be alive. And if we try to separate ourselves from these things, we are diminishing our spirits and we're actually, ultimately, making ourselves worse people. And the authors state that the heart of heathenry and of the people who practice it lies within the people themselves. So think about this celebration of life, the promotion of general well being, love for your kith and kin. These are things that are the heart and the core of heathenry, and all of its fundamental principles reflect this. Now, while our religious practice will adapt and evolve to meet change and challenges and circumstances, those core principles are what matter most, and the core principles will remain even if the structure of our rituals or how we express ourselves will adapt and change. This is the chapter that truly captured my heart the first time I read the book because every instinct within me was screaming that these are the authors who actually get it. They have learned the lessons, they understand, they are making a genuine connection. They're not just throwing together a book to make money. They're not flexing on people by presenting themselves as pseudo intellectuals. And the book obviously wasn't published for the purpose of impressing people or for the purpose of converting people who weren't interested in the faith. This book is a proud declaration of who they are and the sum of what they've been taught and what they've learned along the way. And the proof of concept and the proof of their ideas is really resulting in stronger people who have better morals, who are enjoying and making the most of life. And really, for what function does any religion exist if not for that very purpose? I have zero patience for the train of thought that says that religion can only be religion if it has an institution and all these things built up around it and all these endless layers of useless hierarchy and a canon of acceptable dogma and ways to tell who's in and who's out of the club, all in the name of a deity who allegedly approves of all this and promotes the power of that institution, and that the power of the institution is somehow proof of its truth. I don't think so. That is clearly manipulation for the sake of exercising control over people, and it's a means for people of extremely weak character to pretend that they're more important than they actually are. Just look at the people who are attracted to that sort of thing and the people who really get into the power structure of it. You will find them. You will find them with that kind of attitude that I have just described. But contrast that with paganism, heathenry, and witchcraft. These spiritual paths are drawing people because it isn't about trading one authority figure for another. It's about being inspired, learning to live a healthier and better life, which in turn has a good impact on your relationships. And that in turn has a better impact on life in general. It makes things better for everyone. And this is also why we talk about working with our gods and forming bonds with our gods. There is an emotional attachment at play, just as there ought to be an emotional attachment in our relationships with other humans, and it is a two-way street. We are all a part of each other, and together we're coming together to shape the world. So now you see why I really wanted to highlight that section above everything else this week. Now, moving on to the next thing I was looking into is the idea of Ragnarok. Last week I explored the Norse creation myth in some detail, and today I want to look into the ending of the cycle, which is called Ragnarok. And there is debate about how much of this tale has been influenced by Snorri's Christian worldview, and perhaps the way it has been presented to us and preserved has more than a little infusion of the Christian Bible's Book of Revelation. So it's worth acknowledging this possibility up front. There is a controversy. It is a legitimate controversy. So there's more than the usual reason not to take everything in this tale at face value. So let's go through the sequence of events, the ultimate outcome, and then a little bit into interpretation. So first, before Ragnarok, we have warnings. There will be a rooster crowing. It will be heard in Asgard, Jotunheim, and in Hell. In Hell, there will be a dog by the name of Garmir who will break free. Possibly this is another name for Fenrir, who will also be breaking free, but that is unclear. And as we go through the event, you'll see why there is a strong possibility that they are different dogs. But then the sun turns black, and then there will be a great earthquake, and Heimdall will blow his horn in warning to the gods that Ragnarok is at last upon them. Then we will have a ship called Nagalfar. I probably butchered that pronunciation, my apologies. But this ship will launch from Jotunheim, and by this time Loki will have escaped his own bonds in the cave, and he will be captaining the ship. And interestingly, this ship is made from the untrimmed fingernails of a dead man. There will be a terrible winter that takes place. It will be 3 years of solid winter, no summer in between. Obviously, this will cause great hardship and suffering, and Midgard humans will be fighting against each other. It will be an age of war and adultery, and the shattering of bonds, and all forms of society will be breaking down. Jormungandr, the world serpent, will raise up from the sea, flooding all the lands, and Fenrir will begin devouring all in his path. And then the dead from hell will join the Jotun and fight against the gods, who have gathered together in a specific battlefield for the last conflict. There's at least 3 different names for this particular battlefield, so we'll gloss over that for now. The god Freyr will unsuccessfully fight Sutor, who is a fire giant, because Freyr will be going in his unarmed, essentially, because he gave away his great sword that could have defeated Sutor during his quest to gain a bride. Then we will have Jormungandr and Thor fighting, and each will actually kill the other. Odin and Fenrir fight. Fenrir kills Odin, and then Vidar, Odin's son, kills Fenrir in revenge. Loki and Heimdall are said to fight. They will kill each other. And then the fire giant Sutor burns the world, which would include Yggdrasil. But after all this, Yggdrasil will be renewed, the world is reborn, and there are several gods that are specifically mentioned to come back. Amongst them are Balder, Hoder, Vili, Vidar, Modi, and Magni. And of course, there are the 2 humans who survived, Lif and Lifrasir. And it's said that this new world is called Gimli. It's a world of beauty where wheat will grow without having to be sown, waterfalls flow, fish are abundant, everything is sustained, and everything about the cycle just kind of begins again, or at least it survives in a different form. So the main question that surrounds Ragnarok is, does it refer to a one-time event, or is this a cyclical thing? And different people seem to have different answers, which is, par for the course. We are pagans after all. But because of the cyclical nature of paganism just in general, and the cycle of civilizations rising and falling through human history, even the changing of the seasons from one to the next, right on schedule in this clockwork, I do think that there is strong reason to suppose that Ragnarok is cyclical, because it would fit into this pattern of worlds being born, then waxing, then they reach their height, they begin to wane, there comes to a destruction, and then there's the rebirth. And even on a universal scale, we can observe this to a certain degree. Think of black holes. They are drawing in all the matter around them. Something big collapses, this big gravity well, and it's taking everything out. But then elsewhere in the universe, we will observe matter and light being expelled from what is called a white hole. So the thought currently is that things are going into the black hole, they're being ejected from the white hole, and that everything in the universe is essentially this great, big, gigantic recycling system. All things are coming and going, all things have their time, and the cycle goes on and on. And that's essentially the conclusion that I've drawn about Ragnarok for myself. Now for a discovery of Nordic witchcraft with Freyja Norling. I am continuing on with this series. I watched season 1, episode 5. She talked about 5 historical Viking rituals, and I decided I just wanted to give this one video my whole attention this week. The first thing that Freyja stressed in the video is that while Norse peoples, they did indeed share the same gods and goddesses, that the details of their practices vary from place to place and even from individual to individual. She describes this as a non-doctrinal community religion. It's more about honoring the gods, the land spirits, your ancestors, and certain ideas rather than specific formats of worship, which, I agree. I don't think there's a whole lot of debate to be had about that. Another thing she brought up is that the people in ancient times generally stuck to worshiping the gods that were relevant to where they lived and how they lived, and this makes complete sense for me. For example, I live in landlocked Missouri. What good would it do me if I decided to devote myself to the Nordic gods of the seas and the oceans? Probably not much. But if I moved to the coast, then there probably would be a reason to venerate them. Another thing is that with my work that I do, I'm working as a communicator, to a certain extent as an educator, just if for no other reason, bringing more awareness in the public sphere to different forms of pagan worship. Wouldn't it make sense that I would be perhaps reaching out to more gods who are dealing with that kind of thing, with education, with the communication of ideas, communication in general, and also for nurturing and healing, because a lot of people come out of different religious backgrounds who have, some pretty severe psychological wounds. And part of coming together as a community is giving people a little bit of support as they sort through that damage and begin to heal from it. Those are definitely gods who I should probably be given even greater attention to than I already do. But contrast that with other gods of completely different professions. Well, what benefit would there be? Why would it make sense for me to do that? Why should that God take time out of their day to give attention to me when I'm not even engaged in the kind of work that relates to what they're doing? So it's something to think about. Then again in the video, Freyja stressed the importance of ancestral veneration, the worship of land spirits, and the practice of magic, that these were all very important things, and it was all passed down through the oral tradition. It was just part of normal life during the time period. Now, the downside to this, as Freyja herself points out, is that the written accounts that we have, they were either, jotted down by people who were outsiders, who may or may not have actually understood what they were witnessing or why anyone was doing what they were doing, or that it was written down by people who lived many years after the Viking Age. I mean, we have, to begin with, a game of telephone with the oral tradition. That comes with its own challenges. And then to have what little we do know given to us by people outside the faith, it creates problems. There's a reason why a lot of times people are like me, trying to find principles rather than worrying over much about, are we copycatting exactly what they did in ancient times. But there are a few things that we do know, and at this point in the video, this is where she shared 5 rituals that are generally considered to be authentic practices from the Viking era. The first she mentioned was a blot, which is a sacrifice, usually an animal. And the purpose of the sacrifices were in hopes of getting the favor of the gods. In ancient times, these blots were held where the chiefs lived, and their chief acted in the role of the priest. And these blots generally coincided with the solstices and the equinoxes, but if things weren't going particularly well and the people needed a little extra help, another blot might be held. The second ritual she mentioned was that of human sacrifice. Now, she emphasized that it was rare, might have taken place from time to time, but it was rare, and not to worry, no one, literally no one, is advocating to bring that back. There are traditions best left in the past, and this is definitely on that list. The third, more cheerfully, ritual she mentioned was Yule. And she said that in Old Norse, this was a period of time between the winter solstice and the blot held for it. And the speculation is that this was somewhere around the time of January 12th-ish. This may have been a celebration of the sun, or specifically to honor Thor, or just to attract good luck in the coming year. At all events, I think, at least when I think of our sabbats and our holidays like Yule, I tend to think of the multi-layered aspects of these things. I'm not honoring or doing any one specific thing. I'm trying to incorporate as much of that collected heritage as what I can, just because, well, I mean, that's how it's come down to me. See, the fourth ritual she mentioned, which was rather interesting, is tooth modification. And she said that the archaeology regarding this is really fascinating, and apparently you don't find this sort of things in other parts of Europe. It was very specific to Scandinavia. But there were various things that were done to deliberately alter the appearance of the teeth. This may have been a warrior's ritual, or they might have been doing this to intimidate their enemies. I think this might be the most extreme things Vikings are known to have done to affect their personal appearance. And obviously, I'm not saying that any of us should start monkeying around in our teeth. But there is something to be said for us giving attention to the manner in which we present ourselves and what that presentation communicates. That probably there's wisdom in considering that. And the fifth ritual that Freyja mentioned was wedding ceremonies. One of the things the data said young women would change how they arranged their hair because it signaled their change of status. Grooms would give and receive a sword. There are certain animals associated with various gods of fertility. They may have been sacrificed, or they may have been dedicated as living gifts. Rings were exchanged and vows were exchanged. There was a feast afterwards, and on the way to the feast, the groom would carry the bride over the threshold, and then the groom would thrust a sword into a wood pillar, and how deep it went into that pillar was considered to be an omen of the couple's luck in general, and how many children they were likely to have. And of course, the couple then exchanged rings. Now, not every practice from yesteryear will translate directly into our modern spiritual life and practice, but it is good to hear about what we know was done, try to understand the thought process behind it, and keep the spirit alive as we make the necessary adaptations. So that is what I've learned in my Norse studies this week. Next week, amongst other things, I want to talk a little bit about what I've learned about daily practice ideas. So I'll be doing some research on that. I'll be trying out a few things, and I hope you'll be back to hear my report. In the meantime, let me know whatever you happen to think of all this in the comments section below, or join us on Gilded. There's a link in the description box. It'll take you to our server. It's called Blackbird's Brew, and you can have a good discussion with us there. We'd be very happy to have you. But that'll do it for now, and I will see you next time. Bye.